Now that we've got better with Zoom, now that we've got more connected because of the pandemic, we felt as an FOV, as an organization, it'll be good to meet probably on a monthly basis. And that's the original plan. If people think that's too frequent, we can change it to less frequent, but we'll see how it goes. But this is our first meeting. And the aim is mainly to get together, to socialize, to listen to people who've been in Vellore, spent a lot of time in Vellore, who've been connected with Vellore, and to update ourselves on things that are going on in the institution. So without much ado, I would like to welcome my inaugural speaker, Dr. William Cutting. I don't think those of us who've been associated with FOV or with the Alumni Association in UK need any introduction to William. William has an illustrious career, starting off in India as a missionary in 1961 in Jammalamadugu, and then actually started his pediatric career in India by going to Vellore, spending some time in the Department of Pediatrics, and then setting up the pediatric department in Jammalamadugu, and then came back to the UK and had quite a distinguished career, came back to London as a consultant pediatrician, and then moved to Edinburgh, where he retired as senior lecturer and consultant pediatrician. So Williams had various encounters in India as a missionary with Vellore. And after coming here also, William's been extremely helpful in helping many people, many pediatricians, including my wife Vinodini, in coming here and helping people get around in pediatrics. Dr. Prabhakar Moses was another person who came here, spent some time with William, and then went back and to Vellore. So William, without much ado, thank you very much for accepting to be our inaugural speaker. And I'd like to hand over to William, who will now speak to us for the next half an hour. Can I just request that everyone mute their microphones, please, so we won't have much feedback and much interference as we go along. So if everyone could please mute yourselves, and over to William.
Thank you very much, Dayalan. I must say, with all these many distinguished people I've already seen on the screen who probably know Vellore better than I do, it is a little daunting, but I have a special, debt to Vellore. And my title today really is Indebted to Vellore, personally, but also I speak on behalf of the hospital in which I worked. And so I'm going to start off talking, first of all, about that hospital and how that hospital was indebted to Vellore. In 1961, my wife and I went to the town with this long name, Jammalamadugu. Some people used to say, jam and marmalade will do you good. But so it's a little bit difficult name. I won't go on about it. It is a small town and it is about 175 miles north of Vellore, if we could see the map now, perhaps. And here is a nice picture of South India, the red arrow pointing to Jammalamadugu and the one to Vellore. And the town itself is in a very dry area, and it serves, and the hospital serves many villages around in that area. I have a few statistics from the hospital just to show you that it was really a very busy hospital. When we were there in the mid-20th century, there were 6 doctors most of the time in the hospital, 260 beds. And in 1969, we had over 27,000 new outpatients that year, over 5,000 inpatients, 880 deliveries, 31 cesarean sections, over 1,200 operations were done. And I believe half of them were major operations. And in addition to that, 1,100 operations for tubectomy, female sterilization. And so you can see that represents quite a big load of work. And it was a very busy little place. Now you see the front of the hospital, and on the left are 2 very important figures. On the extreme left is Dr. Ratnama, and her husband next to her, Dr. Ratnaraj, the medical superintendent. And they were very important and very helpful to us. They were there all those years, and I'll come back to them in just a few minutes. Now, could we have the next picture, please? The ways in which Vellore was particularly important to us was that the two lady doctors we had at that time, Dr. Ratnama, here you see in the antenatal clinic, and her colleague, Dr. Flavia, they are both Vellore graduates, both with postgraduate qualifications in obstetrics and gynecology. And I think apart from them, the hospital would hardly have functioned. They were very, very important people, very busy surgical lists, and very important. We also had a very good nursing service. Here is Dr. Ratnama actually operating here. And as I say, she did a lot of the operations. And in the background, you can see a visiting anesthetist from Vellore who actually came to help us learn to do epidural anesthetics. Next one, please. In my early years in Vellore, one of the jobs I had to do was as an anesthetist. And here is a picture of me using the EMO anesthetic machine for one of many, many gynae operations that Dr. Ratnama used to do. And here is Dr. Ratnaraj. In the hospital, most of the specialists were covered. There was a surgeon, and there was Dr. Ratnaraj, an ophthalmologist. And so basically, initially, when I got there, it was not clear exactly what I was going to be doing. But I want to make just a couple of other very important links to the hospital and to Vellore. Next one, please. The nursing service was very important, and we were actually it was run by this lady called Molly Smith, who you can see there, and she did an excellent job. But before long, we realized that we really ought to be training nurses ourselves. And so the successor to Molly Smith was a wonderful lady, a good friend of ours, called Rajama. And the next picture, I think, shows Rajama. Unfortunately, I've only got one of Rajama after she retired. But the advantage of this picture is you can see my wife also after she retired. But Rajama was a tower of strength successor to Molly Smith as nursing superintendent. And it wasn't long before we sent 3 of our senior nurses to Vellore for the sister tutor course. And then, next picture, we started our own nursing training center. And that, of course, was a very important thing that happened at Vellore. One other thing that was important to us was the pathology service at Vellore. When we were doing operations, if we were not sure about the nature of the tumor or whatever we were operating on, we could send specimens to Vellore so that we could have an accurate diagnosis and make appropriate treatment. That's very important help that Vellore gave us. And last and perhaps not least, Vellore was a great reference center for us. We could always send letters to people in Vellore, and sometimes when we had patients we could not understand what was going on, we could write and ask people we knew in Vellore. On one famous occasion, I wrote a long account of one patient I couldn't understand at all to Dr. Benti Karat. And he wrote back and he said, "You have written a classical description of erythema nodosum leprosum." I thought, good gracious, he's given me not only an erudite diagnosis, but quite a lot of help in how to manage this difficult patient. Okay, well, those are the main ways in which Vellore actually helped us. And they were very considerable and very important to us. Now, I want to move on from that to talk a little bit about how we were personally indebted to Vellore. And in 1964, my wife and I left Jammalamadugu to go to Vellore in January because she was expecting our second child. And as we had an issue with rhesus incompatibility, it was deemed that perhaps we ought to go there just in case our baby needed an exchange transfusion, which we couldn't manage in Jammalamadugu. And so we went there, and on the 4th of February 1964, our daughter was born. And we made quite sure that her name was Katrina Mandy, so that her initials would be CMC. And here you are, you can see her at 1 week of age, at 5 years of age, and next picture, at 50 plus years of age. On the left, you'll see her with 2 of her 3 daughters, and on the right with her parents. So we have been very grateful to Vellore for our daughter, who is actually in the house at the moment, sitting with my wife. And so though she has changed her name, of course, since she got married, so she's no longer CMC, but nevertheless, she is a treasure for us from Vellore. Now, let's see where we go from there. Can I have the next picture, please? When we were in Jammalamadugu, many of the major specialties were already occupied. There was a surgeon, an ophthalmologist, the obs and gynae were very well catered for. And when we first got there, Margaret was given the responsibility to look after the TB wards. And she did that very effectively because we had been well indoctrinated in Edinburgh by our professor, Sir John Crofton, who was actually one of the first people to use multi-drugs for TB and for a long period of time. And so his multi-drug therapy was so much better than the single drug therapy and the shorter courses which had been given for TB before. And Margaret really established a great reputation for the hospital of patients getting better and not having recurrences. Meanwhile, I did notice that there were a lot of children around, and you don't have to go very far in India before you'll see lots of children. And I think even to today, something in the region of 30+% of the population are under 15. And of course, the biggest morbidity and mortality is in the under 5 group. Now, previously to our going there, all the children were seen in the women's outpatients on the knees of their mothers. And the women's outpatients was very busy and very crowded. And the lady doctors thought it would be splendid if we had a children's outpatients. Perhaps we could start a children's outpatients. And sure enough, I was landed with looking after the pediatric outpatients. That was all very well. But before I went to India, I had done 2.5 years of hospital jobs, but I'd never done pediatrics. And frankly, I struggled in 1964, up until 1964, because many of the children who came had multiple complications, infections superimposed on malnutrition, and frankly, the mortality rate in the children's ward was very high. I got depressed and really was struggling. But fortunately, my medical superintendent, Dr. Ratnaraj, realized this, and he said to me, why don't you go to Vellore for a crash course in Indian pediatrics? I'll give you 4 months leave of absence. And so from June until September 1964, it was my privilege to go and work in the pediatric department at Vellore. And when I got there, John Webb was the professor, but he was actually director, so we never saw him in the department. The department was run by 4 people, all excellent pediatricians. Malati Jadhav, Sheila Pereira, Casey Marmon, and an American man called Willard Centerwall. All very different, but valuable teachers. And I was given a role. I was put on the rota, the junior rota. I had hands-on responsibility, and I had a lot of practical experience, and I had good teaching too, because I was a supernumerary in the Diploma of Child Health Training. And those 4 months in Vellore really helped me incredibly. And I realized perhaps I could manage to be a pediatrician after all. And that was really my input into that. Sadly, I have no pictures of those 4 teachers, but in the outpatient clinic, on the wall, I think John Webb must have got this picture painted by a famous South Indian artist called Paul Raj. And here we see a depiction of Indian children running to Jesus. And this is a strong memory from my years in the pediatric, my time in the pediatric department in Vellore. And that was a lovely picture to remember. Right. Now, in addition to the value of the department, Vellore has been so important to us because we have met some very inspiring people, and I find it extremely difficult to know who to talk about, and I must actually rush over this bit very quickly. But I'm just going to introduce you to a few role models and inspiring people I met through Vellore and from Vellore. The first one is the lady sitting down below, and her name is Rachel Chinu Chako. She was of the Vellore class, the batch 1942, the first MBBS batch. She was the gold medalist of that year. And after graduating, she went to Great Ormond Street in London. And then she came back and she married, but her husband was a professor in Madras. And so she eventually became a professor of pediatrics in Madras. And she was such an encouragement to us, because at that time we were nobodies in the upcountry hospital. But when we used to visit Madras, Rachel Chinu Chako and her husband made us feel at home. We stayed with them. But it's not only the important people. Could we go back just a moment to that last picture? Because it's many other people who do the job thoroughly and well with competence and compassion, who keep the name and reputation of Vellore high. And here happened to be standing beside her, her daughter Anila and her son-in-law Roy Korula. And it's those sort of people who really keep the place going. All right, next one, please. It's just another one of Rachel with us in Chennai on one visit recently. Next one, please. Now this couple will be known to everyone nearly who's been in Vellore. This is P. Zach, is Professor Zachariah. And he is very well known because he was the professor of pharmacology. But I only really learned recently that he took up that post as a calling because it was very much needed. He really hoped to be a great clinician, but he sacrificed that because physiology was such an important baseline subject. And he has been a key person in trying to identify some of the most key foundational values of Vellore and try to keep people up to them. And one of those foundational values, which really comes from Ida Scudder herself, is this is something which he has written down: to provide quality medical care for the unmet needs of vulnerable people, especially marginalized and helpless people. And so that's one thing which he has written down and encouraged. Now I'm going to have to go rather quickly through several other people, but I want to show that that idea of focusing on the marginal people is one very important thing in Vellore. Next slide, please. This just shows a plaque, and there you can see.
Wherever you want to sit.
And he is, of course, a leader in leprosy surgery, but so important because he didn't just invent leprosy operations, he made quite sure that the rehabilitation was secure. And this rehabilitation concept has been taken on by successors and other people in Vellore. And the next one you'll see here is Dr. Suranjan Bhattacharjee. Here's an example of the Vellore Rehabilitation Department. And here is Suranjan. And he took on another very helpless group, spinal injury patients. If you have a spinal injury and you're a paraplegic or a tetraplegic anywhere, it's difficult. But if you're in India, it's even worse. And Suranjan, who's an orthopedic surgeon, took on the rehabilitation of spinal patients. And they have got a wonderful service now. Can you run through the next slides, please? Every year, all the spinal injury patients come back for a mela, a festival, where they come back, they have checkups to make sure that they haven't got sores on their legs and their bottoms, that their bladders and bowels are functioning well. And they tell each other about how they're getting on. And some of them say, this, I've done this business, I've started in this or that. And they have a meal together. And of course, they have a sports day. And it's wonderful to see the way the rehabilitation has been built into this. And there can be few places in developing countries where the spinal injury patients are looked after in quite such a wonderful way. Next one, please. If you walk through Vellore and you come across a house with this sort of window, it must belong to an expert in polioviruses. That is a depiction of what the poliovirus looks like. And sure enough, inside there lives Dr. T. Jacob John, who's another very good friend of mine, who is actually both pediatrician and a virologist, very important in the world polio immunization, eradication programs. And he has lots of ideas always. One of his recent ideas was, I want to make Vellore a TB-free town. Now that's quite some challenge, but he says, I think we can do it. So I said, I want to come and speak to you about this. He said, no, I've got something more important to show you. And next slide, he took me to see this man. This man is a painter who fell off the scaffolding and fractured his spine at a very high level. He can move his shoulders and one finger. And when the low-cost, effective treatment service of the CMC Vellore found him, he was in a terrible state with bed sores. They helped him to get healed. They encouraged him. And here you can see, with his computer, he is actually running a business with one finger and a computer because he's an intelligent man. And Jacob John didn't want to talk about the things he had done. He wanted me to come and see what the low-cost effective care group in Vellore had done for one man, and here he is. Next one, please. Now, as I said at the beginning, a lot of very routine people really keep the reputation of Vellore up. And here's my friend Prabhakar Moses in the intensive care baby unit. And I want to give a lot of credit to all the other people, perhaps not stars in some respects, but their competence, their compassion has really made Vellore what it is. Next one, please. Now, Dalip and Azra are with us this evening, and I'm not going to mention anything about their work, and it's worthy of a whole session in itself. But Dalip really started a new sort of community development along with health program called RUSA. And one day I hope that he will have a chance to tell you a little bit about that. So next one, please. Here is the frontage of Vellore, well known to many of you who've been there recently. And here is the frontage, next one, of another famous hospital in India. And if you look at the league tables of the medical schools in India, you will often see this place. This is the All India Institute of Medical Science in New Delhi. And one of the doctors I met from there, he said, oh, it's definitely the best hospital, best medical school in India. He said, 100% of our graduates go straight to America. I said, really? That's not a lot of help to India, is it? And so here are these two institutions. And let's have a look at the next slide. Vellore has a special heart. That heart was shown by Ida Scudder when she first identified a group of needy ladies who needed to have help and care. And at the heart of Vellore, both in the college and also in the hospital, you'll find a chapel. And here is the famous college chapel, and also the students there. And many students who've been through Vellore recognize that this is an important aspect of the work of Vellore, is to keep them to remember what matters in these different ways. And this is a key difference between Vellore and the other hospitals for example, the All India Institute. And so we really give thanks that what Ida Scudder started from her heartfelt need to reach out to people who do not have adequate care is now being very effectively used. Still today, we thank Vellore for all the things that they are still doing. Thank you very much. This is just an idealized picture of Vellore students sitting at the feet of Jesus. It's a rather strange picture in a way, but I don't know who drew it. But on the other hand, it does depict something of what Vellore hopes to do, to get the message of Jesus. And remember that the motto was the words of Jesus, I've come to serve, not to be served. And that is the motto of Vellore. Thank you.
William, wow, is all I can say. Thank you for that lovely half-an-hour session of taking us through your days in Jammalamadugu and your time in Vellore. Can I just, I'm sure there'll be other people wanting to ask questions, but can I just set the ball rolling by asking you, obviously you trained in Vellore for a few months in pediatrics, and can you give us some ideas how you took what you learned in Vellore back to Jammalamadugu and any innovative ways in which you practice pediatrics in Jammalamadugu after your training in Vellore?
Well, Vellore wasn't the only place where I learned some things. It gave me the confidence to feel I could be a pediatrician and I didn't have to look over my shoulder all the time and feel I wasn't a strong pediatrician. But I want to tell you about two sorts of services which I learned about from when I visited Africa in 1968. And these two types of services are nothing, not my invention at all, but they are what's called the Under Fives Clinic Service and the Nutrition Rehabilitation Service. And I haven't got a lot of slides to show you about these two. The under 5 children are the ones who bear the highest morbidity and mortality in most developing countries. And David Morley was a professor, he was a jobbing pediatrician in West Africa. And he, like this picture of myself in 1964, started off by seeing patients one by one like this. And when I started running the children's clinic, the numbers increased and increased. And eventually I was seeing 50 and 70 children in a morning, and it was impossible to give an adequate service to them. And this is what David Morley found when he started what's called the Under Fives Clinic. And so after I learned about that, we tried to develop this in India for the first time. Can we have the next picture, please? Now, this is a much better way of running a children's clinic. It looks a bit chaotic here. Let me explain. On the far right, which you probably can't see very well, are the people at the reception. They receive people coming in and they weigh the babies, because growth monitoring is the first step in knowing if your children are okay. And once you have weighed them, what David Morley planned was to put the weight on a growth chart, which was easy to recognize. And this is a sort of chart that David developed. You'll see the age along the bottom, the first 3 years. You'll see the weight on the y-axis. And you can see 2 lines running diagonally across there. And David Morley used to say, this is the road to health. If your child gains weight steadily in his first 3 years along that road, he's going to be all right. And you don't have to have a PhD to understand a child's weight or weight loss. But if a child suddenly loses weight, then you need to do something. And our nurses were very competent to identify that. And because they were working together, they had time to talk to the mothers about nutrition and feeding and immunization and all the other things which a pediatrician ought to do, but which you can't do if you're seeing patient after patient in an ordinary clinic. And so the development of this under 5 service for children was a very important step. And it's now practiced in many other countries. But I think it's true to say that we were the first ones to do it in India, and we developed our own charts, and that's one of them. Now, the other aspect that was a big problem to me was the malnutrition which underlay much of the disease in children. And I thought, well, you know, I can't get on top of this illness while this child is so malnourished. And I can't do anything about the nutrition until we do something about better feeding for children. And then I learned about a nutrition rehabilitation service, which had been developed first in South America. But I saw a model of this in Africa. And the whole concept, I haven't got time to tell you, it's quite a complicated business to set up, because the bones of it are this, that you involve the mother in healing her child's malnutrition by feeding it back to health with local foods, under supervision, and with encouragement. Now, to do that, you've got to understand what is the food availability in the area. You've got to understand about the way they feed children in the area. And so it is a lot of background work before this can be put into operation. But eventually, Oxfam supported us, and we had a 6-bed unit in which a mother and child were admitted together, and they stayed usually up to about 3 weeks in this. And we had 2 nutrition demonstrators who were actually just village women teaching and working with the mothers, helping them to feed their children back to health. And it did work amazingly well, but it was a lot of background work, and we were helped to set up these appropriate diets and so on by nutritionists from the Sri Venkateswara University in Tirupati. Next picture, please. Here you can see one little chap who was very malnourished when he came, and there he was later on. That's not just 3 weeks later, that's about 6 months later, and you can see. And the last picture I want to show you is very important, because here is a little malnourished child on the left as she came into the unit, and on the right as she was discharged. But I want you not to look at the child, I want you to look at the mother, because the mother changed so much. She came in frightened, nervous. I've seen other children with this disorder die, and then she goes home. I can cope with this now, I can deal with it myself. And so this is a wonderful thing. And in a sense, it's a little bit of the story of Ida Scudder. Ida Scudder thought she could start running a clinic for these ladies who are in distress. And so she set up a hospital. And then she realized, I've got to set up a medical school to teach people, because just treating is not enough. I've got to do training. So treating is very important, but training is much more important in the long run. So medication is valuable in certain circumstances, but education is invaluable in public health. And that's a message I'd like to leave with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. That was really great. I think what we'll do now is we'll actually open this out just for a general discussion. If there are questions to ask William, if there are other things people want to just chat about or mention, you can just carry on. I'm just going to start off by saying two things. One is, I'm sorry, I apologize at the initial bit, I didn't introduce Thomas Kuriakos, who is with us now. Most of us know Thomas, happens to be my classmate and a good friend of mine. Thomas was a professor of ophthalmology and the head of ophthalmology, and has had a huge role in building up the Shell Hospital to the place it is now, and retired from Vellore last year and is now doing a consultant job up in Dundee for a few months. So welcome, Thomas, and thanks for joining us, and good to have you here. The second thing I just wanted to mention in relation to William's talk was Dr. Rachel Chacko, as Chinnu auntie to me. Having grown up in Madras, she was our family pediatrician. And her other connection to Vellore is she actually had a son, George Chacko, who belongs to the batch of 1966, who unfortunately died very tragically in his first year of medicine, in a car accident. And I remember clearly as a 7-year-old boy attending that funeral in St. George's Cathedral in Madras. And in fact, the first year best incoming student in Vellore for medical student is named after Chinnu auntie's son, George Chacko, is the George Chacko Prize for the best incoming student in medicine in Vellore at the moment. So that's all I have to say. If anyone wants to ask, say anything, just chat, please feel free.
Oh, I can see Fleur.
Before we log off in about 10 minutes, we will probably just ask if anyone has any comments, any improvisations, any criticisms, anything is open. Please get in touch with Ruth. Don't make your emails too long. Probably a paragraph is enough rather than 3 pages of criticisms. But this is a new venture and we want everyone to be involved. It's something that we felt would be worth exploring, and let's see how it goes. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much to William. Yes, so if there's anything anyone wants to say, please go ahead.
I'd like to share a memory.
Yeah,
actually,
go ahead, please.
At rehab, when I'm from the batch in 1970, the same as Suranjan, and we used to go singing to the rehab center. The rehab center was not as it is now. It was a very basic place with a lot of help for the people they were treating. And I think they had also started the halfway house system. But I remember evening out the ground in front of the old rehab center was just, it's all built on now. But we dug and rolled out that area so they could have the first sports meet that they had, that they now have regularly, I think, every year. But the very first one was when we as students went and rolled it all out, and they had the meet outside the rehab center. So that's a very, very nice memory for me, especially with Dr. Cutting talking about it. Thank you.
Yeah, we also used to go, the SEM used to go and sing in the rehab center every Tuesday evening. So I remember doing that as a student. The SEM every Tuesday evening, we used to go sing in the rehab center and in the New Life Center, both of those. We used to do that on Tuesday evening.
in different languages.
Yes, in different languages. That's right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. Yes.
Could I say something?
Yes, please go ahead, Jim, please.
My name's Jim Millage. We had, with my wife Betty, in East history, had 10 very happy years in Vellore. And I've recently written an autobiography, my autobiography. I couldn't face the hassle of trying to get it published commercially, but I have got a number of copies which my daughter had done, and it is available on the website for download if anybody's interested. This is the book, Mountains, My Lab. It is. I've been fortunate enough to have quite a number of expeditions, including an Everest expedition and so on. Some of them done from Vellore, some of them done after I returned to this country. And it is really aimed mainly at my climbing friends and people interested in it. It has been quite well received. And as I say, it is on the internet. If anybody would like the download information, if you'd like to give me an email, my email is jim, J-I-M, @medex, M-E-D-E-X, .org.uk. jim@medex.org.uk. Thank you.
Very good. Could I ask if anybody who's looking in can remember Sheila Pereira and Malati Jadhav? Have they any memories of those two, or Casey Marmon, the three of my teachers?
Yes, we remember them very, very well because we did a lot together. Sheila and this is me, Chitra. Okay, so Sheila and Hoshang and I, Hoshang sitting here beside me, we used to get together a lot, most evenings because we lived not far from each other, literally around the corner. And so we used to get together most evenings. Sheila taught me a lot of cooking. I knew no cooking at all, and Sheila taught me a lot of cooking. So yes, we did know her very well.
My memory of Sheila is one day I had the misfortune to fall asleep in one of her lectures. And when I woke up, her face was about 6 inches from mine. Since that day, I have never fallen asleep in a lecture.
I mean, they were excellent teachers for me because they have different attitudes. Malati Jadhav was very particular. She was running a research program at the time, and we had to make observations in a very minute and particular way and document them. And I learned a lot about careful clinical examination from her. Sheila had a broad look at pediatrics and knew a huge amount about nutrition and many other things. And so they were really a contrast, as you can imagine. And then Marmon, he was a system fellow. He was, in those days, I used to think of him as a big cardiologist, but he's actually started a medical school himself in Kolancherry, which I believe is very highly reputed now. And the fourth one there, Willard Centerwall, he was a man who came from Loma Linda University in California. And he was very important, I think, in phenylketonuria, the discovery of phenylketonuria. And so look at the spectrum of teachers I had for that 4-month period, from those who were concerned about metabolic and genetic diseases like Willard Centerwall, Malati, the minutiae of clinical examination, and Sheila, the big, broad picture of pediatrics. It was wonderful. It was a golden time for us. We had a small apartment in Harley Street. Have you ever heard of Harley Street?
Oh, yes.
Well, it used to be there before it was knocked down and the big YW building was. So we had an apartment in Harley Street, and those 4 months in 1964 were a golden time for us as a family. Our daughter Katrina was much admired all around the campus. Thank you.
Vinay and I were probably one of the last residents of those small houses in Harley Street before it was brought down. In our final year of PG, if you were married and if you had a child, which we did at the time, when we were doing our MS and DCH respectively, you could get a quarters in Harley Street. So we lived in Harley Street for a year, probably one of the last ones there. William, you have to tell us the story about Prabhakar Moses and his MRCP.
Yes. Well, when you know, Prabhakar Moses had done his MD Madras, and he came to Scotland to work to get some postgraduate experience. He was with us and did very well. He was a registrar in Edinburgh and Kirkcaldy for a while. And he came to Scotland, and he said, well, I think I'd better do this MRCP examination, which is meant to be so difficult. So anyway, he passed his examination with flying colors. But then afterwards, he told me, MRCP, no trouble. But driving test in Scotland, rumba custom.
And we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
I think, am I unmuted?
Anne
Okay.
was going to talk. Yeah.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Andrew Patterson was saying that he thinks that the Centaurs live next to them, and that is right. That is the big house next to Vidialium.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was right. Yeah.
Yeah. Who was the neurologist who lives there afterwards? Anyway, no, but Andrew's correct. Yeah.
Oh, how lovely. Happy memories.
Oh, yes.
Can I speak as an Oxfordshire neighbour?
Yes, please do.
To say, firstly, how very touched my wife Joanna and I were to discover how much was done in this extraordinary way, and particularly in the way that William and Margot pushed feeding proper nutrition long before it was discovered in the West, where it is now a crisis, of course. Also, as somebody who spent most of his life in broadcasting and talking to cameras, I recognize a fellow professional when I see one. I think he's a tremendous communicator, and thank you for it all.
Thank you, Nicholas.
De nada.
I forgot to mention in my introduction about William is also, he's quite a famous author now. William has written quite a number of books. William, can you just tell us a little bit about the books that you've written, William?
Well, after I retired, I metamorphosed from being a pediatrician to being an amateur geriatrician. And by coincidence, well, I guess if Jim can show his books, I can show my books then, can't I? I wrote 3 books. These books are really intended for encouragement for old people. And they're a mixture of stories and poems and jokes and devotionals. And the last book I have written is only since my wife developed dementia. I wrote this one here, and which I think is a more personal book, but perhaps more useful. And a number of people have used it when a member of their family have developed dementia. It's fairly simple. It's called Dementia: A Positive Response, Hope, Help, and Humor on the Journey.
Thank you.
Not at all. It is a privilege to talk to these people about Vellore, because it is such an important place. And I do hope that it goes from strength to strength. And people there are still many excellent people working there. And I really send them love and prayers and hopes for the future.
Thank you, William. Joy, did you want to say something?
Well, just to say, we've been absolutely spellbound. I've never known time go like this. It's wonderful to be amongst you. William, you've given us an extraordinary hour, and just to be amongst all of you here, we feel we're amongst giants, and we just thank you all for this wonderful privilege tonight. It's been super. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Jeff and Joy.
Standing on the shoulders of giants, even a dwarf looks quite big.
Very good.
Okay, I think we've almost reached the hour. I think time to draw this to a close. Thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry, Ajit, did you have something to say?
Alan, before you close, if Ruth can unmute all of us, we can give William a good big clap.
Yes,
definitely.
You have to unmute yourselves. Muted themselves.
All unmuted. Excellent.
Thank you, William.
Thank you, William.
My pleasure.
Alan also.
Yeah, okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is on February the 25th, and it's going to be the last Thursday of every month. So if you put that down in your diaries. Next month, we're going to have Brian and Anne talking to us about their time in Vellore in the 60s and 70s. And as you all know, Brian and Anne go back to Vellore every year, and they'll also be able to tell us how things have changed since they started there in the 60s. And we very much look forward to listening to Brian and Anne next month. Again, like I said before, if you have any suggestions, anything that you want to feedback, please get in touch with Ruth. And thank you all for joining us. Ruth, is there anything else you want to add before we log off?
Just give us that date again. I didn't get it down.
February the 25th. That's
February. That's called.
Yeah, Thursday, February 25th at 7:30 p.m.
I'll email you all with the date.
We'll also have information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the link. It'll be the same link each time. No, I'd just like to offer my thanks to William as well. It was a brilliant talk. Lovely to see all those photos alongside. We're so grateful that you're able to do that for us tonight. So thank you. And thank you also to everyone who came. It's really encouraging to see such a good number of you here.
Have we got a list of everyone who attended?
Well, I've been trying to scribble them down.
It would be nice to know.
I'll send it to you, William, later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Stay safe and hope to see some of you again next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.